The following is a DW Ancient Egypt production. Amenhotep I was not succeeded by a son, but instead by a military man, Tuthmosis I. This is usually a break in dynasty. However, Tuthmosis I was most likely a co-regent during the last years of Amenhotep's reign. Tuthmosis also married the princess Ahmose Mariat Amun II, who was the daughter of Ahmose I and Queen Nefertari. Since ancient Egypt was a matrilineal society, he had married into the royal bloodline. Upon Tuthmosis I's coronation in 1520 BC, he led the greatest Nubian campaign all the way to the Fourth Cataract, when Nubia revolted. With him on this journey was Ahmose, son of Ebana. In Nubia, Tuthmosis I conquered two tribes in the Bedouins, which the Egyptians called the Sand Dwellers. Tuthmosis I personally traveled up the Nile and killed the Nubian king. Upon victory, he had the Nubian king's body hung from the prow of his ship before returning to Thebes. Again, Egypt's centralized government prevailed over tribal Nubia. Nubia did not become centralized until about the 25th dynasty. As a result, Egypt never had any real trouble conquering them. Nubians were very skilled as bowmen and were used in the Egyptian army as mercenaries. Tuthmosis I also conducted a Syrian campaign where he crossed the Euphrates River. This was the first major river which the Egyptians had encountered that flowed from north to south, and they found it very strange. During this campaign, the Syrian princes declared allegiance to Tuthmosis I, but after he returned to Egypt, they discontinued tribute and began fortifying against future incursions. Tuthmosis I organized great building projects during his reign. His greatest project was at the Temple of Karnak, which was under the supervision of his architect, Aneni. Previous to Tuthmosis I, Karnak probably only consisted of a long road to a central platform with a number of solar shrines along the road. He was the first pharaoh to drastically enlarge the temple. He also erected two obelisks at the Temple of Karnak. Tuthmosis I was also the first pharaoh to be definitely buried in the Valley of the Kings. Aneni was commissioned to dig his tomb, KV-20, very likely the first tomb to be constructed in the valley. Aneni was responsible for major construction projects under the pharaohs Amenhotep I, Tuthmosis I, Tuthmosis II, and the joint reigns of Hatshepsut and Tuthmosis III. He had many titles, including Superintendent of the Granaries, Superintendent of the Royal Buildings, Superintendent of the Workmen and the Karnak Treasuries, among others. Aneni, on the walls of his own tomb, talks about building the first tomb in the Valley of the Kings. I inspected the excavations of the cliff tomb of His Majesty, alone. No one seeing, no one hearing. It was a work of my heart. My virtue was wisdom. There was not given to me a command by an elder. This means he did this by his own authority, most likely coming up with the idea himself. He continues, I shall be praised because of my wisdom after years by those who imitate what I have done. The pharaohs up to this point had tried to hide their tomb entrances, noting that every tomb had been eventually robbed during the first intermediate period, and now during the second intermediate period, they realized it was futile and began to hide their actual tomb. Remember that Amenhotep I was the first pharaoh to separate his mortuary temple from his tomb. Now with Aneni's innovative idea to construct these tombs in the valley, tomb secrecy would be the main focus throughout the remainder of the New Kingdom. KV-20 was the original burial place for Tuthmosis I, who was later reinterred in KV-38, and KV-20 was later adopted by his daughter Hatshepsut to accommodate her and her father. The tomb was known to the Napoleonic expedition in 1799, but a full clearance of the tomb was only undertaken by Howard Carter in 1903. KV-20 is distinguished from other tombs in the valley, both in its general layout and because of the atypical clockwise curvature of its corridors. The tomb descended through a series of 5 corridors, 2 ending in chambers with central descents, until it reached chamber J1. From there, a corridor led to the burial chamber J2. 3 low-ceiling side chambers were cut into the north end of chamber J2. Because the soft shale walls of the burial chamber, they were unsuitable for decoration. Mortuary texts were written in red and black ink on limestone blocks, which probably lined the walls. Archaeological evidence reveals that KV-20 originally extended only to chamber J1, in which Tuthmosis I was interred, and that the tomb was recut and refurbished during the reign of Hatshepsut to accommodate the burial of both her and her father. Later, the burial of Tuthmosis I was moved again to KV-38 by his grandson, Tuthmosis III, while the burial of Hatshepsut probably remained in KV-20, eventually suffering from robbery and official dismantling. Anini was commissioned to dig KV-38. The plan of the tomb was simple, consisting of a steep corridor which opened into a small, unevenly cut chamber. A steep descent led down from the center of this chamber to the burial chamber, which was provided with a single side chamber off its left wall. The tomb was poorly cut, and water penetration has further contributed to the tomb's rough appearance. Only in the burial chamber were there traces of decoration. Tuthmosis I's mummy was discovered in an 1881 mummy cache at Deir el-Bahri. This cache revealed many of the mummies of the New Kingdom, which had been saved during the later 21st dynasty. As I've mentioned before, the Egyptians generally lived on the east side of the Nile and constructed their tombs on the west. The Egyptians associated the west with the dead because the sun died in the west every day. The Valley of the Kings is located on the west bank of the Nile, directly across from the Temple of Karnak at Thebes. In looking for a place to construct a secret tomb, Anini chose the most barren, inhospitable location. Nothing grows in the valley. The humidity is also usually about 18, a number not normally used to rate humidity. It's a very dry place. A virtue of this spot is that it only has one passageway, one entrance into the valley, so it is easily guarded. Another reason for picking the area is the natural pyramid located at the top of the cliffs, which are about 100 feet high. Anini was also commissioned to build Tuthmosis I's mortuary temple. This temple has not been found, most likely because it was incorporated or destroyed by Hatshepsut's mortuary temple.